Good evening, peeps, and what a lovely evening it is. A little bit rainy coming down. Anyway, what's going to be happening? This is an unplanned conversation talk as usual. I will eventually get to edit these videos properly and cut out some of these parts that's not relevant to the conversation. I can certainly cut down the time of what's talked about and be more relevant. Hopefully I'll be learning something about this soon in the near future, and that will help to cut the time down and be more direct about what the message is that I'm bringing out and what I'm trying to say. There's so many things that keep happening all the time. There's so many different angles to come at things from. Basically, they all come down to the same thing. But of course, if it was only to talk about the same thing all the time, you're just not going to follow anything, let's say. So we bring in all these other angles as well, because they are relevant to the individual angle, which is us as an individual and an animal as an individual. And that is all that everything comes down to. The basic part. So anything else that we bring into it, sort of to try and pique your interest into wanting to sort of, maybe comment at it from your view, from the way that you see things, because of, say that we take it, say on the basis of hunting. There are so many different routes. There's different types of hunting. So you've got the culls or hunting. Huntings are like deer, foxes, rabbits, whatever. Culls are similar. So deal with those types of things as well. But when it comes down to individual animals, most people do have a preference for certain specific animals. So if we talk about a specific animal, there is a way of sort of focusing what we feel as individuals and realising that we're individuals. And if we've got a feeling for a particular type of animal, that empathy to understand what that particular type of animal is going through, whether it's deer or fox or whatever. So once you're sort of gone specific on a particular type of animal or species of animal, sort of thing, the then more difficult thing to do is to associate that individual animal with all the other different species of different animals. And everything should be quite simple to do so. So you go with foxes. Now they've got quite a big following amongst people that just constantly are generally animal consumers, and yet they can sort of see in that fox what they see is the cultural norm, the cultural reference in there being a food chain, and sort of seeing that so they eat other animals, so they're part higher on a food chain, and it's actually seeing the food chain as in stages, going higher and higher and higher until we believe it comes to us. Now, in the general natural world, we are not top of the food chain. In a natural world, if we were to be put up against the individual animals themselves, we would come out significantly worse as just the pure humans that we are, without us using our tools that we've created and everything like that. So like cows and even pigs, if it was just down to our bare hands and not the actual tools and implements that we use, we would not be able to do anything about those animals. We would very rarely be able to kill them other than by accident or whatever. And certainly many types of dogs, wolves and big cats and whatever, we definitely would not withstand that situation. The best we would do would be to create communities where we have warnings amongst ourselves about when those particular predators were around. Yes, so like I say, we've become totally isolated from the animal kingdom. We've sort of, if you look at it this way, because we've separated ourselves from the animal kingdom into a massive extent. Our old homes are practical fortresses against anything natural. No animals can get in without our allowing them to get in. Even insects are almost impossible to get into our properties. There are maybe some that might be more than others, but in general, the majority of human properties are inaccessible to other species on this planet. It's so in that way we are the equivalent of aliens on this planet. I know it's difficult to sort of comprehend that sort of basis, but it is quite easily practicable. You imagine that if aliens came down, and just imagine the situation. They, as aliens, well, there's clearer pictures of why we're probably alien to all life on this planet. Now, I'm not saying we were not previously. We weren't, unless we have actually been dumped here and left here. But yeah, the fact of the matter is, our thought processes are so far beyond even the most like us species on Earth that even the most intelligent of the species of animal on this planet, apart from us, still live in a state of existence, living, not they are actual lives. They are actual lives. It's not, and they are free lives and everything like this. And for the most part, when they're not in any danger or whatever, they are having an enjoyable life. But our construct of this planet has totally decimated the natural order. Every single area of land that we occupy, that we use, whether it's through farming, whether it's through mining, whether it's through fishing or whatever, every part that we destroy in some way say like a town building out with the further extinction of the natural environment, destroys local species. They're the first biodiverse pieces that disappear. Almost everywhere in wild areas, of all types of wild areas, there are small pockets of biodiversity. And most of our towns and cities had those pockets of biodiversity that had disappeared. And amongst those bits that have disappeared, those parts that have disappeared, whole species have disappeared. Because for some species, just one particular area is their only existing area. Now they are mostly in the form of insects of different types, mostly. But some are individual animal species that have been wiped out through the loss of those individual areas. It is important that we do understand that sort of thing. We've got to realise that, say we've got a part of our garden that's been quite wild for some matter of time, different species have come and inhabited that area. Different species of insect will have moved into that area, and for some, that area is perfect for them to live and to exist. Now, say we get a landscape gardener in to do the garden or anything like that, and suddenly we wipe that whole establishment of a biodiverse section of ground. For most part, when we do that to a garden, we don't intend to allow much in the way of wildlife ever to exist again. It's a major problem. It's the equivalent of more or less building our house onto the garden by removing what part of wildlife there is actually left in the area. We've got to stop seeing animals as food. We really have. We've got to even stop seeing an area of land as ours. Sure, we do need those areas, and we do need we will need to sort of take in more areas. But we should always be concentrating on existing areas that we have already used, and not on even more extension into the countryside. To some extent, extensions into the countryside do not always matter too much, because the extensions are generally on into farmland. Now mostly when farmland has been used and whatever, it's not biodiverse land at all, because of the biodiversity has been destroyed on that land already by the modern farming techniques that we use now. Everything from the pesticides, herbicides and everything like that. The removal of vegetation, mostly the hedgerows and things like that have gone already. All you have is just the field and the actual crops that actually grow on them. So biodiversity has been wiped out on that field, and that is part of the reason for farming to exist, as in a way. It makes for land easily accessible for builders to move onto quite quickly. And that's why we tend to want to increase farmland into wild areas. Now in Britain that doesn't happen quite so much anymore, because we've already near maximised the amount of land that we could actually farm. We're already in the 180 position in the world for the loss of biodiversity. So that's we're there's a 180 countries with more biodiversity than we here in Britain have, and that's because of with our advancement and our industrialisation, we have close to maxed out the areas of lands that we would want to take over and to control. The remaining wild lands that are left are not all just wild. Nearly all of them are maintained in some sort of way, whether it's forestry, conservation, like reservoirs where they tend to manage the landscape around the reservoirs and things like that. So there's to ensure the amount of water that actually drains into the reservoirs. There's so many different types of things. The land that is still forested in Britain is around 13 to 14% of all land in Britain. That is still forested. Now, a lot of that forested is not ancient or natural woodland. The majority of that is plantation woodland, which is the equivalent of farmland, only less intense than farmland. It's less intense because of obviously trees take so much longer to grow, so the ground has time to nourish, to recover, to be rich in soil nutrients and everything like that. As long as it's not one species of tree, which in quite a lot of cases plantations are very much one species of tree. Only in the last 20 years has forestry commissions worked on the basis of trying to diversify the forests that they actually control, but even then they still do plantations, so because of they want plantations where woodland is easy to sort of gather wood from when they decide that they're going to cut the woods down. So like I say, there is very little ancient woodland that is purely natural to what it ever used to be, sort of thing. There's very little. No other country is you're looking about maybe 30 to 40 other countries that are worse than us for the overuse of the land. Now that's quite bad on its own, because that's a heck of a lot of countries that are massively overusing their land. Anyway, I'm sort of getting around to that part. I've gone round in a sort of roundabout way about talking about so many different things, but there is you come back to, in the end, farming again, which is most of the country. So you're looking at about what 13, nearly 80%. No, not 80. No, not far off, but probably 70, 75 to 80, between 75 and 80% of all land here in Britain is farmed. And of that 80% of that, in fact it's more than that, you're looking more like 84, 82 to 83% of that farmed land is, and this is farming for crops and animals, that's what I'm talking about here, not the forests that are farmed, but considered farm. 80% of actual farmland is purely for the farming of animals. Now, quite a small area of land is where the actual animals are kept, but because the animals that are not fully fed on just those small areas. Say in small areas, you're looking at actual animal spaces. It's difficult to say how much animals are on the actual land itself, because of very much of the animal agriculture has now concentrated the animals into big barns, particularly in the chicken industry, which is massive barns that are with thousands and thousands of birds. But even the pigs and the cows are starting to be put into those similar sort of facilities, whereby they're constantly kept within places. And if they are allowed out, they're only allowed out into small areas of land. So the food that all these animals are given comes from a massive area of land, because they require corn, wheats, and other grasses of all types, sort of thing, to feed all those animals. So the mass majority of farmed land that is producing crops that could be human nature, could be human nutrition, is actually going to feed animals that are on a much smaller area of land. I'm pretty sure that it's something like if the animals were to be out in the fields and whatever, they would probably cover around about 30 to 40% of the actual farmland that we use. And that's if they were that's if they were out for most of the time, which they are not anymore, and actually had space for each individual to be able to sort of at least have some sort of freedom. And it's not an actual freedom, but it's some sort of not so it wouldn't be crowding as such. That it won't be actual crowding. And those things are exceptionally rare now. Sheep are the only animals now that are still given space out in fields, mostly, because they're not always generally seen as specifically a food for humans. They are more bred for the wool upon their backs. They do become meat at the end of the time, but basically their wool is their main commodity. Because if you're looking at in the life which is usually 4 or 5 years, maybe, except for the lambs, of course, which are exceptionally young, at 4 or 5 months or something like that of their life before they go into their deaths. And yes, they are quite a majority of the sheep that are bred, sort of thing. So they are on a yearly basis. But sheep that are left to sort of live out a little bit of life is usually about 2 to 3 years, something like that. And that's whereby they'll be shorn for their sheep, for their wool. And the skin at the end as well. So when for their last wool skin is actually for their skin as well. Then the rest of them goes to the meat industry. Yeah, that's a sort of got around a little bit of stuff. But yeah, the mass of the country is farmed, and we do not need to be farming all that much land. We do not. more than half of all the farmland that we now use could, with absolute ease, be put back to be rewilded for biodiversity. And we would still, on the land that we would have left, which I would say would be, instead of us farming 80% of the land, we would only need to farm at the most 40% of the land in Britain, at most. Just think how much greener, how much more beautiful this country could look if we were not farming what we do farm now. The 40% that would be left to farming would be able to become I've got to go. I didn't quite fully explain that. To get it down to 40% in the first place, you do have to have everybody not consuming animals. If we're only ever going to reduce consuming animals and still farm animals, we are not going to reduce the land to be rewilded to any sort of level that is sustainable. The only way you can get it down to a sustainable level for the population is in existence now is to get it down whereby no animals are farmed and just 40% of the land is actually used to farm. And 40% of the land would still produce an excess of crops for food that we could all consume adequately, and even that would allow for organic farming. In other words, the removal of herbicides and pesticides, because there are numerous, there is veganic farming or organic farming, and both of them exist and work. And also on that basis, what happens in many of the organic and veganic farms is that proper rotation happens. Specifically in veganic farming, rotation is the essential for the land, because rotation allows for individual fields to rewild for a year or two so that wildlife and plant life recovers to produce nutrients to the soil once again, without having to use farmed animals. With 40% of land farmed, this sort of thing can be done exceptionally easy. But of course, we've got to come down to seeing the animals as individuals with their own lives that they want to live, how they want to live, not how we want them to live. Even if we're letting them, even if we're rewilding and letting them live, to some extent we are still saying, there you are, that's what is yours. But at least that is still better than actually enclosing them, locking them up, forcing abuse upon them, taking their lives at exceptionally early ages. It's also wrong. It has to end, and we can end it. You can end it. Even if don't think about it as a futility. It's only a futility if you're going to continue to do it yourself. Every single person who stops consuming animals helps to bring an end to what is happening to animals sooner, and you'll automatically save or prevent the suffering of animals immediately that you do stop consuming those animals. I do hope you look into it a bit more. I'll try to add a few extra facts to these. I should always add a bit more information when I post these things, because obviously it's just my comment that's coming to you. I do hope that you will look up the things that I've mentioned, and you only have to put in searches for individual things that I say, and the information should come up. Always in Google, generally. Just put in just a few words of what I say of something, and usually just that search will come up with specific things about that topic. Try to be discerning. There are a lot of opposing views to my view, a lot, and a lot of them have reasons not in the best interests of animals, not in the best interests of the environment, and definitely not in our best interests. I will leave it there for now. Thank you for listening. Please look up the information.